Hi, I'm Thomas. Welcome back to Pilot's Workshop, and welcome to number 9 in our series to build the ultimate woodworking workbench. After finally installing the work surface in the last video, we will take it a step further and add practicality today by mounting the T-slot rails and drilling the hole pattern, turning this into a complete and usable workbench. We start by looking at the edges. The table surface rests on a recess that we cut way in the beginning of this build. At this point the edge is not perfectly flush to the surface, so things might get caught there. I chose a handheld router with a flush cutting bit to take care of this. I extended the bit only so far that it would not touch and scratch my surface plate. Any final bits I took off by hand. After the narrow edges were all flush and nice, the front part with the large vise was still overlapping in the same way. I mounted it like that back in episode 7 to allow for flush trimming later. That time is now. I put together a quick contraption to hold my small router in place. This would use the table surface as reference. Side to side, the router got fixed by 2 strips of wood that were just a bit thinner than the base of the machine. Then I used small metal brackets to really squeeze it into place. The angle brackets were the ones I had at hand, but there's no meaning to that and flat ones would be perfect. You can see that I changed the bottom board for a slimmer one, as my router could not extend far enough for the thick one from before. A large straight cutting bit would then do the work. With the entire contraption being on the flat surface, I brought down the bit and fixed the depth in place. My small anvil made sure that my contraption won't tip over. A small test cut in the corner showed that my mechanism would work. Then it was time for focus and patience. But the result was great. Some quick sanding over finished it off. Next we can give the workbench a solid look and feel by rounding over the upper edge, using a small roundover bit with a guide bearing. A quick touch with sandpaper finished also that. Next, I took a straight piece that I could use as a guide for cutting the slot for my first aluminium T-slot rail. I took my time to measure the distances very precisely and checked it many times before starting to cut. A tip that I should give you is to use more clamps than you first think are necessary. The vibration of the router will try to loosen the clamps and move your guides without you even noticing. I adjusted my machine for the thickness of the rails and added just a bit to cut out a tiny bit more than I would need to. The rails should sit just a hair under the surface of the workbench. Then it was time to cut the slot. Viewers who have some experience using a router will see the mistake I am making here. I'm using the straight edge of the machine to go along the guide because it seemed logical to me. But this forces you to keep pushing it flat to the straight edge without twisting it for the entire time to maintain a straight cut. Better would be to use the circular side of the router because it is more forgiving in that way. Some routers even have an entirely round base, and now I understand why. Since those T-slots for M8 screws are 11 by 17 mm, I'm using a 17 mm bit for cutting the slots. And the result confirms that it works quite nicely. The remaining slots were cut in the same fashion. The slot for the middle rail was cut so it would have the exact same distance to the router plate as the one on the edge. With all slots cut, the rails can be fitted. The required screw holes can be drilled comfortably using the line in the middle as a guide. The distance of the holes are determined by eye. All holes then have to be deburred from the bottom and countersunk from the top to make sure that nothing gets caught on the screw heads. What followed was the satisfying work of mounting them. The final step of this episode is creating the hole pattern. First came the slightly tedious work of marking all spots. Once again, I am using a wax pen that was meant for writing on glass, and it works brilliantly on the shiny surface of the plywood. The distance of the holes in this way was defined by the vise. To guarantee that any size object can be clamped, the maximum distance of the rows of holes must be smaller than the largest distance the vise can be moved. Once everything was marked, the holes could be drilled using my typical method of pre-drilling 3mm guide holes first, followed by the larger ones. And there we have it. Our workbench finally became a workbench. All that's left is to move it into its central position, and it can be used like any other woodworking bench. However, it still is not the ultimate workbench. In the following episodes of this series, I will show you how to build and use gadgets that make it even more versatile. And of course, we still have to make the storage area packed with drawers and hidden functionalities in the large empty area underneath. But as it is, this workbench is finally ready for all kinds of exciting projects that are already on my list. So make sure to also stop by next time. This is Pilot's Workshop. Thank you for watching.